What's going on, everyone? How's it going? This is my second stream, my second time doing this. Bear with me a little bit. But let me just run through exactly what the deal is and kind of why I'm doing this, why I feel the need in a way to do this. So, I'm a student. I'm in university right now. And, I'm blessed with the opportunity to go to office hours for all of my professors and learn more about these topics and classes that I'm taking. But I know not every student has that opportunity. I know other students who have to get in wait lists and lines to go to office hours, or they have office hours during a time in which, they might be at work or taking care of something else, or in other classes, It can be difficult to, find extra help for some of these topics. Now, I'm going to attempt to help in some way by talking a bit about biology, which is one of my favorite, if not my favorite, topics. So I hope this helps someone, if not multiple people. If it could help someone, I'd be happy. Okay, so yesterday I spoke about, what did I speak about? Oh, I spoke about DNA and this whole, semi-conservative model of replication. What it basically is the idea that new DNA is derived from old DNA, or at least, one half of all new DNA has something from the parent strand, whatever parent DNA it came from. Okay, so it's not completely new. It's semi-conservative. It keeps some from the previous generation. That was yesterday. But now, I kind of want to take a step back, to be honest, and talk a bit about cell theory. And you've likely heard a lot about cells. Everything is made of cells, and they're the basic unit of life. But there's a lot more to that than might meet the eye. And I think it's very important to talk about, especially if you're taking biology, or if you have an interest in biology, or you just came across this random stream and you want to learn something. That's cool too. That's totally cool. So, cells. What's the deal with them? This whole idea of cell theory revolves around the basis that, cells are the fundamental units of life. We say that cells are alive. And what does that really mean to be alive? Well, in this case, it means that cells can reproduce on their own. Okay? They're capable of self-replication without being dependent on some other source. And that's kind of where we get into the whole debate of, well, are viruses alive? Technically they can replicate, but they're dependent on their host. So are they alive? It's difficult to say. But this is strictly within the confines of talking about cells. Cells are the basic fundamental units from which we get life. They're the most basic things that are alive, you could say. And all living things are made of cells. You're made of cells, I'm made of cells, animals are made of cells, everything that we see is alive in this world, they're all made of cells. You can't see them unless you have a microscope. You can't see them with the naked eye for the most part, but they're there, and they make us all up. Okay. And another thing is that every new cell that comes into being doesn't just spontaneously occur. Cells don't just reappear out of nothing. Or they're not just like, an amalgamation of organic molecules in some solution that, with some spark of energy become a cell. That's not happening constantly. That doesn't happen. The deal is that all cells that we see are derived from other cells, from pre-existing cells. In a similar way that, babies that are born don't just come into existence, they're birthed by their parent. It's a similar sort of idea, where you have parent cells and you have progeny cells. Progeny meaning the next generation. And in biology we call them daughter cells, even though they're not really gendered. But the point is that all cells that we see come from pre-existing cells. Okay. And the last thing is that there's this thing called natural selection, which is a whole lecture on its own, but if I were to summarize it, I would say that there are different mutations that happen within cells, within all living things. And these mutations change something about the organism. You know, you might get a mutation in some animal that changes its fur color. You might get a mutation in some animal that causes it to grow an extra limb. Likewise, you might have a mutation in a cell that causes it to die instantly. You know, so you have hey, double donkeys, what's going on? So you have all these different mutations that can arise from cells that are reproducing. What does this have to do with natural selection and evolution? Well, you know, these mutations, like I said, happen in cells. Some of them, well, the vast majority of them are detrimental, meaning that the cell dies as a result of these mutations. That happens in the vast majority of cases. And there are also a multitude of cases in which there's no real change. So there might be like a small mutation in some part of the DNA, but it doesn't make a difference. It's not major enough to conjure some kind of difference. That can happen. That can be the case. But then very rarely, but very importantly, you get mutations that do something good for the cell, that cause something to be improved. Like you might get a mutation in a cell that causes it to grow an extra organelle, and as a result of that, some cellular process might become more efficient. That can totally happen, you know, and that does happen sometimes. And what that means is that when a cell is bettered by that kind of mutation, when there's a beneficial mutation, it's better able to survive in its environment. Okay, and what are the implications of this? If a cell is better able to survive in its environment, it's more likely to reproduce. And all of these mutations and all of these changes get passed on. Okay? So, evolution happens as a result of this natural selection, where there's kind of an involuntary and spontaneous choosing, you could say, in nature, of those cells that have mutations that help them reproduce. Okay, it's that idea of survival of the fittest, which you've likely heard. You know, this is all about Charles Darwin. You know, if you ever read On the Orders or On the Order of Species, this is exactly what it's about. The whole idea is survival of the fittest. Those organisms, and in this case, those cells that are most able, that are the best at surviving in their environment, and that reproduce the most, are going to pass down their genes, and they're going to comprise the majority of the population. And it's this natural selection that's created the huge diversity we have in life today. Okay, so just to recap, right? The cell is the beginning. The cell is the beginning, and it's really the pedestal on which we build larger organisms. You know, these amalgamations and groups of cells that come together form these bigger organisms. And that's a big deal. That's huge. Just to recap once again, cells don't just arise out of nowhere, right? We still have to obey the laws of thermodynamics, you know. Cells don't just come out of thin air. They arise from pre-existing cells. Okay? And yeah, I mean, that's pretty much it. So